Hi, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Let's Talk Talent. I'm your host, Wina Mutuc. I'm a writer, educator, and talent development professional, currently working as a learning and development manager. This podcast is basically going to be your go to place for all things talent development. And I don't just mean that in the technical sense. I think one of the main motivations for me to really start this podcast has a lot to do with my Millennial Existential Crisis. I'm currently in my early 30s, and it's only now that I'm really figuring out what it is that I want to do with my life. A lot of the times, people have told me in my life that I'm the kind of person who tries to do too much, wears too many hats, has scattered interests. For example, I graduated from college with a degree in BS Psychology, but I took my master's in creative writing and I majored in what is probably the least pragmatic, or in the eyes of non-literary people, yung pinaka-useless sa lahat ng genres of literature, which is, you guessed it, poetry. And it's only now that I'm almost approaching my mid-30s, to be honest, that I've kind of seen how everything can tie together. For a long time, I just saw my work as something that would kind of tide me over, so that I could do the writing thing and so that I could work in the academe or teach. And late last year, I had this kind of revelation, which is interesting because it was a point at which finally it seemed like all of the opportunities I was looking for in terms of the academe were open to me. I published my first book and I got an offer from 2 universities to teach with them. And then I realized that I was actually enjoying the things that I was doing in corporate a little bit more, and that I really liked continuing education and I really liked adult learning and training and learning and development. Maybe at this point I kind of have to explain a little bit about why I was so hesitant to accept that when I've spent the better part of 10 years basically doing that. My family business is also in training, consultancy, coaching, talent development, in short. And so I really grew up around the trade. I think that every person has a stage where you kind of rebel against what you know your parents want, or this idea of your destiny being dekahon, or parang nakalatag na para sa'yo. So I feel like on the one hand, there was a lot of that. On the other hand, it's also because I really love literature. So from a young age, mahilig na talaga ako magsulat. I know yung mga classmates ko nung grade school, some of them went to my book launch last year, and all of them said na parang finally, like hindi na kami nagulat. This is exactly what they would have pictured me doing in like 20 years, which is fantastic, right? I love that. But I also realized that I think I'm currently at a point in my life where, although I love literature, I've also realized the limitations of literature, the limitations of having a literary academic career, especially here in the Philippines. I feel like my talents in terms of teaching can be applied somewhere where they can make a bigger difference. And this is something that took me a long time to figure out. I'd worked for the United Nations, and something that I really liked there and something I really found fulfilling was that we were able to see the direct impact that training and development, or learning and development, or talent development, whatever you want to call it, has not just on the Filipino workforce, but on the Filipino family, the Filipino individual, and I mean that across different regions. There's so much that can be done on that level, and recently I kind of decided that that's really something that I want to look into. One thing I struggled with was really figuring out how to sew together all of these different facets of myself, especially when it came to job interviews or even just meeting new people where they're like, oh my god, creative writing, masteral ka pala. Bakit? Or ayaw mo magturo sa academe, ayaw mo mag-focus na lang magsulat, etc. And so I always have to constantly explain those two sides of myself. But recently, I've kind of come to terms with that and figured out that what I want to do or what I do is really trying to marry those things. When I think of the success of people like Taylor Swift or I don't know, even Britney Spears, I guess, like anyone who has become a sensation in their field, it's always because the business side of it has also been intact. The industry side of it has also been intact. And I think that's the part that's kind of quite lacking in Filipino literature. So I feel like my place in industry still has like a big purpose where maybe eventually that's something I would look into doing, like putting up a publishing house or just a space for people to publish and publish with quality. Although I will say right now, sobrang dami na rin ng mga independent outfits that are coming out. But it's not the norm yet. And so there's a lot of room to grow in that respect. So whenever I think of tying those two sides of myself together or kind of connecting those two parts of my life, it really comes down to the gift of writing being there to inspire me to be creative in my daily life, and this corporate work being there to eventually lend to this publishing industry or this atmosphere of learning that I think could use some help still in the Philippines. One of the ways that I came to that conclusion was really hearing from other people. There's this quote by the poet Ocean Vuong where he says, "None of us really get where we are on our own." Someone always has to pay our way. Someone at some point has given us something for free, has given us a free ticket to a seminar, or gave us a free seat at this kind of training, or someone gave us the opportunity to meet this specific person who gave us another opportunity. I think it takes a kind of humility for us to accept that we can't do it on our own, and none of us really end up doing it on our own. With that, the idea for this podcast is really one that's centered around collaboration and making these conversations more accessible to other people who maybe are struggling with that existential crisis right now. I want everyone to know that it's okay to give yourself grace, to make room for growth, to think about career shifts or what career path you want, to really kind of soak in that curiosity about what it is that you want to be doing. And the only way to be able to do that, I think, is to have access to people who have also figured it out, who have also decided. And I'm very proud to say that the lineup I have for this first season of Let's Talk Talent are really people who I look up to, and people whose philosophies, not just in work, but also in life, in creativity, in experiencing that joie de vivre, I really admire and look up to. So yeah, it's going to be very exciting. One of the things that I'm super looking forward to is also being able to have you guys tell us what you think about the podcast and tell us what you want to know or what you want to figure out about talent development, about career pathing, those kinds of things. So it would really help us out if after listening to this episode, you leave us some comments in the Q&A section on Spotify, the comment section on YouTube, or wherever you're listening to this podcast from. Next week, I'll be back with Sir Edwin Ebreo, President of the Philippine Society for Talent Development and CEO and founder of ExecuServe. Again, this has been your host, Wina. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Wina_Wonders. And you can listen to Let's Talk Talent anywhere you get your podcasts. I'll see you next week. Bye!